Hello there. 13 days, 15 sailors and one very relieved British government. An extraordinary 2 weeks in British-Iranian relations came to its conclusion when the 15 captured personnel landed at London's Heathrow Airport. They made a brief appearance before being transferred to military helicopters which flew them to their base and their waiting family in the southwest of England. On the political side, however, British Prime Minister Tony Blair insists there was no deal done to secure their freedom. But top officials in Iran say they did receive a letter of apology from Britain on Tuesday. Tim Friend has been following developments.
On their way back home, business class, to cheers and lots of questions. Were they in Iranian waters? Were they forced to make confessions? How were they treated? Dressed in military uniforms and carrying personal luggage, they briefly posed in a straight line for pictures before they were flown by helicopter to a base at Chivenor in Devon, about 300 kilometres southwest of London. Then, away from the cameras, there was a private meeting with their families, medical checks and a debriefing. Earlier, before they left Tehran, they gave final interviews to state television.
I won't say anything different than I've said over here. I'll be absolutely, completely truthful. I'll definitely promote Iran, actually. I think there's a lot of ignorance in the UK, really, about Iran and the people.
Just a feeling of relief that I'm actually going home to see my daughter and my family. Obviously, we've had a very pleasant stay under the conditions we were in. Obviously, we weren't tourists, but all the treatment has been fantastic towards us, and there is no bad feeling at all towards Iran. We're just very thankful that your people were so kind to us.
But back in Britain, the Prime Minister says Iran must change its ways if it wants the trust of the West.
The general picture, as I've said before, is that there are elements, at least, of the Iranian regime that are backing, financing, arming, supporting terrorism in Iraq. And I repeat that our forces are there, specifically at the request of the Iraqi government and with the full authority of the United Nations.
What the British Prime Minister had to say here today clearly shows that the West's arguments with Iran are far from over. Not just the nuclear question, but also allegations of sponsoring terrorism in Iraq. But Mr. Blair said that new lines of communication with Iran had been opened during the 13-day crisis, and it would be sensible to pursue them. Tim Friend, Al-Jazeera, London.
And speaking to us earlier, Tim said it was likely backdoor diplomacy helped secure the release of the naval personnel.
Yes, and I think there were clearly things happening behind the scenes in all this. For instance, in Iraq, the day before yesterday, we had an Iranian diplomat who'd been held for some time there, suddenly released, and there are 5 other Iranians currently being held in Iraq who we think the Americans are about, or possibly about, to let Tehran have consular access to. The Americans say they're part of a Revolutionary Guard faction. Tehran says they are bona fide diplomats. So there was some relenting going on, and although this wasn't exactly a tit-for-tat deal, this may have speeded up the release of the captured Britons.
But as the return of the sailors and Marines was being welcomed by Tony Blair, Britain's military was suffering its heaviest loss in Iraq for months. 4 British soldiers and their Kuwaiti interpreter were killed in a roadside ambush in Basra. And then hours later, a suicide bomber attacked a Sunni television station in Baghdad, killing at least 1 person and injuring up to a dozen more. Here's Owen Fay.
A parked car laden with explosives was detonated just outside the front of the station. The assistant director of the station was killed outright. Another 12 people, mostly guards, were injured. No group has yet claimed responsibility, although the Baghdad-based television station is owned by the Iraqi Islamic Party, and the Sunni group has often been targeted in the past because it's seen by some groups as being too closely aligned with the coalition. In southern Iraq, a major oil pipeline was blown up, further weakening the already fragile oil infrastructure. Iraq exports more than 1.5 million barrels of oil per day, oil carried through these pipelines to Basra. Attacks like this have made it nearly impossible to regenerate the Iraqi economy through oil exports. And also in southern Iraq, 4 British soldiers and their Iraqi interpreter were killed in an ambush in Basra. A vehicle in a convoy struck a roadside bomb so powerful it left a crater in the road more than a meter deep. The soldiers then came under attack by gunmen using rocket-propelled grenades and small arms. The 5 were killed outright. Another soldier remains in critical condition. 6 British troops have been killed in the last week, making this one of the deadliest 7 days for the UK since the war began. Overall, 140 British soldiers have been killed in Iraq in the past 4 years. According to the latest plan, the force numbers in Basra are meant to be cut by 1,600 in the next few months. Owen Fay, Al Jazeera.
A squadron of German fighter jets has arrived in northern Afghanistan to help NATO-led forces with reconnaissance missions. Now, the deployment has been welcomed in Afghanistan, a country which doesn't actually have an air force. But it's caused concern back in Germany, where some groups fear it will suck the country into fighting against the Taliban. James Bays was there when the jets landed.
A German tornado arriving in Afghanistan. But these fighter jets will not be allowed to do any fighting. Their mission is deeply controversial and their role will be limited to reconnaissance only. One by one, the tornadoes touch down. NATO has been requesting more forces, particularly in the volatile south of the country. This is Germany's contribution, 6 planes, which will be based in Mazar-e-Sharif in the north. They will sometimes be sent on missions to the south, but not with a combat role.
Our task is tactical air reconnaissance, so we take pictures from the air to make information for the commanders here in Kabul to give him more information, so the security here for the ISAF people, for ISAF and also for the Afghanistan people can be improved.
Even though theirs is not a combat mission, the arrival of the tornadoes here is deeply controversial back in Germany. They were only deployed here after a heated debate in the German parliament. And a recent opinion poll showed that 57% of people in Germany wanted to see all their troops withdrawn from Afghanistan. James Bays, Al Jazeera, Mazar-e-Sharif.
And over in Pakistan, dozens more foreign fighters who are alleged to have been linked to Al-Qaeda have been reportedly killed by Pakistani tribesmen in new fighting near the Afghan border. Tribesmen in the Waziristan region are reported to have killed scores of fighters in the most recent clashes. Officials say many of those killed in the last 24 hours were from Uzbekistan. Earlier this week, the commander of the tribal militia threatened what he called holy war if the foreign fighters didn't leave the area. Al Jazeera's Kamal Haider is in Islamabad.
The latest situation on the ground is that the tribals who have been bearing the brunt of the fighting and fighting against a very dedicated and trained Uzbek militia, it must not be forgotten that the IMU took active part in Afghanistan in the fighting. The leader, Jomana Mangani, was killed when the Americans launched an attack late 2001. He was killed near Mazar-e-Sharif. Tahir Yaldashev, also known as Tahir Yaldash, then took over the IMU, and they were pushed back from near the Uzbekistan frontier towards the Pakistan frontier, and then after Anaconda they all came into Pakistan. So these tribals are now asking the political administration to put in a request to the military to bring in gunship support and logistical support that they say is badly needed. However, there's been no response from the military.
Now, all 1,200 passengers travelling on a Greek cruise ship stranded in the Aegean Sea have been rescued and taken to the island of Santorini. The ship was carrying foreign tourists, mostly Americans and Germans, when it ran aground. Some passengers escaped on lifeboats, whereas others were taken ashore on smaller vessels. A marine spokesman says there's no cause for concern and that there are no injuries. Well, Christina Pirovalakos is a reporter based in Athens. She's been following developments and is on the line now. Christina, can you just bring us up to date with what you're hearing there?
Hello?
Christina, can you hear me? It's Kamal Santamaria.
Yes, I can.
Fantastic.
Sorry, the line.
That's
yes.
all right. Can you just bring us up to date with the latest that you're hearing where you are?
Well, the latest is that all passengers have been evacuated safely using lifeboats initially and then with the help of a small ferry. But the crew, approximately 390, still remain on board, but everyone is safe.